motion to accept the minutes of the meeting held January 25th.
Can I give roll call?
What?
Need a roll call?
The roll call before the minutes. Well, go ahead. Second.
That's all right. Mr. Bernie Rosen, chairperson.
Here.
Mark Kaplan.
Here.
Michael Spitzer.
Here.
Bud Larson.
Here.
Representing Comptroller Scott Stringer, Michelle Mark Levine.
Here.
Representing Public Advocate Letitia James, Umair Khan.
Here.
Representing Mayor Bill de Blasio, Nicole Fleming. Here. We have a quorum.
Sorry to be out of order. I'd accept the motion to accept the minutes of our meeting of January.
Let me make some editorial changes.
Yeah, we'll make some changes. Subject to some editorial changes, they're accepted. We have another item. We have the annual report of the Audit Committee. Thank you. And I'd like a motion to accept that.
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Hearing no objections.
I think there's
Warren, we follow your format pretty much now. It's a regular thing.
I'd like to suggest a couple of little changes.
All right. As I say, editorial changes we can always give
go
to
over
the
it
secretary,
more?
and
Yeah,
she'll
yeah,
take care of it.
Yeah, no, like all the terms and
Yeah.
everything.
Okay. I guess I don't know where to get there's so much paper. All right, wait. All right, this is that. Nobody ever calls me on my cell phone. I don't believe it.
That's the president.
Hello?
It works.
I keep getting these robocalls on the cell phone. It irritates the hell out of me.
You're catching me at a bad time.
They're selling insurance.
I think it's the painter. I have the damage.
You might not like the color.
What am I going to do? I'll have to call him back. I have his number. I've been waiting for him for so long. All right. All right. I guess the first component unit we want to look at is the New York City water and sewer system.
Yes, good morning, Chair.
Speak up, please.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Audit Committee members. My name is Robert Balducci. I am the controller for the New York City Municipal Water Authority. I'm going to make some introductions. We have a couple of new faces here, and I'd like to just go through them. To my right is the Assistant Controller of the Municipal Water Authority, Namika Sharma. To her right is, who mostly everyone knows, is Warren Rupel. And for the most part, he is the auditor on most of these entities. And if we have someone else who's the auditor, I will introduce them to that particular entity. To my left is Alan Anders, who's the Chief Executive Director for the New York City Municipal Water Authority. To his left is Joe Murin. He's the Chief Financial Officer of Department of Environmental Protection. And to his left is Omar Nasir, who is the Acting Executive Director of the Water Board, and he is the Treasurer of the Water Board. So with those introductions for the water system, I'm going to turn it over to Alan Anders.
Okay, I wanted to just...
So, Alan, let me ask you before you start, where do
Yes.
we stand with the third water tunnel?
I'm going to let Joe, who I alerted that would be your first question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Alan. So, as to the status of City Tunnel 3, the Brooklyn-Queens leg, at this time, we are preparing that tunnel to get it activation ready by the end of the calendar year, which would mean that we would have water in the tunnel should it be necessary to put it into service should an emergency of any nature take place. Furthermore, the mayor has proposed adding additional funding into the budget to be adopted in June for completion of the entirety of the tunnel, which would be projected to be by 2025.
You're not using the third water tunnel, or you are using it?
We are using the third water tunnel leg that's in Manhattan, but not the Brooklyn-Queens leg.
Manhattan?
Yes, the Manhattan leg.
Just the Manhattan?
Just the Manhattan leg.
And when will it go, excuse me, when will it be hooked up to the other boroughs?
It will be, as I said, activation ready by the end of this calendar year, and then by, fully functional by 2025.
You have to remediate the old tunnels. They're older than me, they're older than you, they're even older than Mark. I mean, you have to do that because God knows what will happen to them.
And that is the intent. So once we do have that tunnel in, service,
you'll remediate.
we'll be able to go and look at Tunnel 1 and Tunnel 2 and see what we can do about taking them out of service and doing whatever repairs may be necessary at that time.
All right, proceed, Mr. Ramos.
Okay, I'm going to, just a personal note about someone who's not here on our side of the table. Then I'm going to toss it back to Joe to give some of the highlights of the audit year and the 6 months after that, and then we'll talk about some of the numbers, try to do all that briefly. Tom Palicelli, the Executive Director of the Water Authority, after, I think it was 9 years, preceded by Moody's, preceded by about 5 years as my treasurer when I had his position, has made a career change. He's moved to San Diego, and he's the chief investment officer and deputy for the city of San Diego. So it's but a lifestyle change. We just heard yesterday, and for people on the other side that know Tom who aren't sitting down, you might sit down, because he lived down behind Goldman Sachs on Restaurant Row and had the shortest walk to OMB of anybody in the building. He has bought a car, so true Southern California living. But we miss him. He did a great job. So as to sort of just a couple more highlights of the past year and a half, turn it back to Joe.
So on general terms, the system has been operating, as we all planned and hoped it would be in terms of revenue collections good. O&M, there are no issues that we've been facing. We have a robust capital plan, one of which the mayor has proposed with this, the January plan to increase by almost $3 billion, bringing it from 17.8 up to $20.8 billion. That additional funding will enable the system to do both the third water tunnel, as we discussed already, also to make start construction on the Kensico Eastview connection tunnel, which is connecting from the Kensico Reservoir to the UV plant in Eastview. The rehabilitation of the Ashokan Reservoir system, which is almost as old as one of the tunnels and is in dire need of significant repair. Also adding money for structural improvements to the North River wastewater treatment plant, which there are some conditions with the underlying structure as well as with the roof structure. Continuing our green infrastructure program, which is part of our CSO control measures to mitigate stormwater, and various other capital improvements to the wastewater system, the water supply system, and the distribution system. Other than that, unless anyone has any questions, I don't have any other updates on that.
At the end of let me very quickly go through just with the usual year. During the audit year, we issued $2.4 billion of bonds, of which $1,954 were used for refinancing, lowering water rates. We defeased at the end of the year another $721 million of outstanding bonds. The excitement during the audit year had to do with water rates, where the usual 2%, 2.1% increase, we try to keep it level, not have any ups and downs, was proposed. But in addition, the mayor announced that there would be an elimination of the rental payment that the water system had typically paid the city. In addition, a credit of I guess it was $183 per homeowner. All that was challenged. We lost at the trial level. We lost, I guess it was last week,
Yes.
in the appellate level, and the mayor announced that we had a very strong dissent at the appellate level, and we were going to appeal that. So we will go ahead, as we normally would, DEP and the Water Authority and OMB, with the rate increase in April and May. The rate increase did not pay for the credit. It was actually we we have money flowing through the system that we had accumulated for that rather than defease bonds. We were going
So
to.
there will be a rate increase in the spring.
There will be a rate increase in the spring. The rate increase from the previous year wasn't implemented because of the court order, but we had enough, kind of, knew that this would be controversial. We had enough cash that we can get through the year and without disrupting the system at all.
Somewhere, it's been a few days since I've looked at it, there was a credit for some, no, let me put it the other way. You wrote down some personal service accruals, rather substantial amounts.
That's correct. So given that we had not go into contract for personal services for a while, we worked, DP worked up.
So
some
do the
accruals.
ratepayers get a break on that?
Well, no, that really is, all of that, and maybe I could leave it to Alan. I mean, you need to look at the bottom line. So you need to look at what the revenue collections are. You need to look at the expenses. Those are just very.
It goes into the
factors.
mix eventually.
That's correct,
Okay, so
yes.
that's as long as, no, I think that's important.
And the correct thing was, since we were settling the contracts, we needed to take down those accruals and reverse out that expense.
I don't know what we would have done without the water system. I mean, with all the pollution requirements and whatnot, it's gone. So it's come a long way. Got to thank Mark Page for
Yes.
this cash cow, but it had to be.
They used to always, when we had meetings with investors, Mark and myself, they would ask, when is this ever going to end, this big capital program? And,
No.
well, it's interesting that some of the bigger programs actually are getting toward, or moderating. We're getting toward the end of those. It's an ongoing thing, both the mandates and just maintaining the system. So it's not getting a lot smaller, but there's investors have
It'll kind of level off, I think.
have
is the point
appreciated
you're
that
making
fact.
now.
Yes,
Yeah.
progress.
The fiscal crisis delayed the construction of the third water tunnel, just like it did the Second Avenue subway. The reason I asked about the remediation, many years ago, I read an article, I forget where, that before the third water tunnel was even where it is now, that it could be a terrible problem if one of those tunnels really, I mean, Maine is one thing, but the tunnel itself, God. But basically, I think things are going very well, are they not? And
Yes, I think as measured by, again, the fact that, except for last year because of the litigation where we sort of skipped a rate increase.
all right,
But, we're able to, again.
you were able to absorb it.
We're able to absorb it,
Good.
and then we're going to, don't want to predict the exact level, but we're probably back to that 2% sort of inflation level of rate increase.
That level of rate increase, how much would
About 2%.
that's very little. That's very.
Sorry.
Go ahead, go ahead.
All right, the rental payment that the mayor is forgiving, that's the amount that's paid on the old general GO bonds of the city?
No, we actually moved beyond that, and so there was a formula, but it's a significant amount of money. I think it was a quarter of a.
Yeah, we were approaching about $250 million
Yes.
a year in terms of the rental payment. And the old GO debt, I think, is, I don't know if it's all been retired, but it was down to maybe tens of millions of dollars.
Right.
I have a special relationship with you because I have a home that looks at the Ashokan Reservoir,
Ah,
which is way down the northern basin. And I always wonder, and I've asked this before, when the basin is that low, wouldn't it be a good idea to go and clean out an accumulation of stuff, and when the water comes up again, there'd be more capacity? And I've never heard an explanation of that.
Joe?
Well,
I know that's special pleading.
I know,
not done
and
yet
it,
either.
most of what we do have accumulated there is natural collection of debris or,
Yeah.
runoff from there. One thing that we have been contemplating and has been deferred for a couple of years is, we do use at times alum, which is used to reduce turbidity in the water system, and that has accumulated. We had started a program back when Hurricane Irene, I believe, was it hit back in the early 2000s, and we were working with FEMA to get funding for that, but that has since been deferred, I think, because there were some, as we, the chair said, some remediation issues in terms of how we would approach that and how you disturb that lower level as you start, picking it up from the bottom of the reservoir floor. So it is something that we do have consideration of, and at some point we will probably be doing that, particularly in the Ashokan. But as we've also been able to balance the reservoirs, that we've also been able to reduce somewhat the levels of the alum because we're able to balance using one system versus the other system.
Well, I was more focused on it. When you walk around that reservoir, there on the shores, there's an accumulation of wood and other things, and it seems to me that when it's low is the time to send in something and pull it out. And I've seen, and that relates to the question, is in the reference to equipment, there's reference to vehicles, no reference to boats. And the reservoir has many boats.
It's something we could consider doing. I would have to, bring it back to
I'm
our...
asking in that second question, if you have depreciable assets, which include vehicles, why don't you have depreciable assets on the balance sheet, which are boats?
Oh, no, we would also have our boats. Most of our boats would be in city for, related work to...
No, I'm not questioning the need for the boats. It's just that you show assets which are depreciated, which are vehicles. You don't show boats.
Yeah, so I think that they are depreciable assets. They're categorized. I think we have them as buildings
They may not be
and
categorized.
vehicles. I think within the vehicle title
Is
where you
boats?
have the
Mr. Chairman, may I ask?
You want to get on the cash a little bit.
Michelle.
I'm sorry, Michelle. Go ahead, speak up.
Thanks. Just a follow-up question on the labor accrual write-down. My recollection is that we had previously accrued based on the city collective bargaining pattern. It seems like this was a very large surplus to have accumulated using that pattern. Is there a particular reason why this settlement freed up so much resources?
I think I'm gonna, Joe.
Yeah.
I think that your office worked on that.
One of the things that we were accruing for was the presumption that there were certain, what's called Section 220 trades titles.
Yes.
That, can come to the controller's office for determination where they make a comparison to external like type labor. And some of those patterns were well in excess of what the citywide pattern was. And we had some preliminary determinations from the controller's office that indicated that they might be settling higher. So we were accruing based on those. Subsequently did get settlements that did follow the pattern. So that's why there was such a large accrual. And this was primarily for one of our largest locals, which was the sewage treatment workers, which is about 900 of our employees. So that's why that had a large, accrual to that. And we had a few others as well in the trades titles, but not as big as that one. So that was the bulk of why there was so much of an accrual there.
Thank you. Could you also talk about the revised formula for the rent calculation, or whether this was just a one-time dollar amount change?
I don't think there was, basically the mayor made the determination not to request the rental payment.
For a single year?
For the entirety. The expectation is that this will go on for the remainder of his term, and, as then if succeeding mayors so choose as well.
There had been discussion and press as late as a couple weeks before the rate setting last spring that it might be phased out.
Yes.
Yes.
And he decided at the last minute that in conjunction with us, that the money was there to make it work, that he'd like to just go ahead and do it. It's a longstanding position of his.
The
So
city does retain the right to collect that in the future if necessary, is that correct? Under the lease
We
agreement?
haven't done anything legally, and how could we, to preclude a subsequent mayor from
Right.
taking a different position? Yes.
I also noticed that there was a reduction in the amount of late payment fees. Was there a forgiveness program, or are you just really collecting so much more promptly than in the past?
I would attribute that to latter what you said. Due to the rollout of the automatic meter reading system, we've had a much better reporting level in terms of accuracy of the bill reads that are done. Sorry, I'm not speaking. So I believe we're up to like 96% of our bills are actual. So the number of estimate bills have fallen dramatically, and that would be a large reason why ratepayers would be either late or not be making payments. And people have access now through the web access to be able to see their bills online and in real time. So that's done a tremendous effort in having people be able to see what they owe and to be more prompt, both as well also to be able to see if they're having an issue with their bill, so they could be responsive back to us and we to them, as if, particularly if you have a leak, so that you don't have a leak where it builds up for months on end, because you wait to get your bill, that they could see it usually within a couple days, and they could take the corrective action to be able to take care of that.
So I think that speaks really highly to the program of meter reading and other technological advances. Have obviously increased the confidence in the billing level to the point where it's affecting positively your collection rate, which is
Yes.
very impressive. I noticed that there was also a write-down with regard to some pollution remediation costs, and I'm curious if that has affected your estimates for future remediation costs, or what else contributed to that?
This is a GASB 49.
Yes.
Yeah, I think those are continuing, as we've looked at them over the years.
Just updating.
Those basic, things as we go through, particularly, looking at the plants and other, system assets in terms of where you find certain incidents of remediation that have to take place, whether it's chemical bulk storage, petroleum bulk storage. There's still remediation that we have with asbestos, with lead. So that's something that we have, it's not as systemic as it used to be in the system, but as we do upgrades and improvements to it, you will have more of that found. So it's I don't think we're ever going to totally get away from it, but it has been managed, I think, much more diligently with GASB 49.
Sounds like you also may have been making relatively conservative estimates in the past. That
Yeah,
also speaks well for the management. Thank you.
I have one other technical question. In the deposits and investments, you carry U.S. Treasuries and U.S. agencies in level 2. And I'm more often accustomed to seeing Treasuries and U.S. in level 1 because there are enormous markets in those securities. Why are you carrying them as 2s?
What page you on?
I'm on page 34. I always thought the Treasury market was as big and as liquid as any market around.
So this is something that I think we ask all the time, every time we speak to the GASB. When we actually implemented, I think this is 72, I think it is, on the leveling of investments, we got different, responses back from the pricing agencies of how we would level out these type of investments, the bonds and the debt. I think our rule of thumb is that if it's a debt instrument, it is a level 2. This is, I think, technically what we've got as a technical response from the GASB also, although they haven't written it down into the implementation guide. What we see as the equity market it would be more of a level 1. And just to be consistent with that, we have reported that throughout all our bond financing entities as a level 2. I think the technical part here is that some of these, I guess these when we buy these investments, they go into an auction process, or where you're bidding for some of these, you get 3 bids on it, and that technical reason would create it to be a level 2. This is what we understand. This is what we've reached out to, and I think this is. I'm going to also, Michelle.
I just want to thank you, Bob. That was a very good explanation. I just want to add a reminder that these leveling categories are not reflective of investment risk.
No, I understand.
They're simply reflective of not even liquidity. It's only a reflection of the pricing mechanism and how reliable the estimate of market value is. So that if there is anything other than a single published market price, right, you start going up the categories.
And
So,
you,
so again, this does not reflect liquidity or credit risk at
No,
all.
I understand that, Michelle. I think, and I didn't have a chance to go back, that other organizations carry these securities in level 1. And I'd have to go back into what I've seen. Maybe not in the city.
Actually, that would be interesting. When we implemented for the city, we actually worked a little bit with the World Trade Center Captive Insurance Company, which had implemented this as as an optional disclosure earlier. They had reached the same conclusion with a totally different set of auditors, et cetera.
Okay.
I'll ask
Go ahead, Mike.
a burning question. On page 53, you have the number of employees. Is that, it's in the other post-employment. Does that carry the same number for, the pension people and NICEs?
yes, the same census data is used.
Because there's 21 pages of footnotes
Yeah.
for 18
Yeah,
total employees.
Yes, so this is an
Is
interesting.
that your question, Bernie?
Yeah.
So, yeah, this-
Happens with he fills
so-
up the annual report, the actual used to.
So
That's true of all of these.
if you want to push my buttons, you
Done.
sure will. I have
No, I realize
I
that
have
there
not.
must be.
It's all of these.
There's a lot. We're in the business of issuing bonds, and you can see what we have in debt and what we have in investments.
The lawyers want it.
Albeit, we have 24, 25 pages dedicated to OPEB and pension here. I think, that actually dilutes to what we actually do, because that liability is less than $1 million on each one of them. I have asked, I don't think that for our purposes, the OPEB and pension is material to accrue that liability and to report this. I've actually have spoken to a couple people, except for Michelle, and now she's going to hear it publicly, about, and I've spoken to the auditors and to some of the GASB members, if, does it, of thinking of actually pulling this out and actually not including the OPEB and pension because of what it really does to our financial statements. And that's just talk right now. I think that it's prudent to create the infrastructure to implement the new OPEB standard. That way we have it. If we have an increased staff, we'll have that infrastructure that we can always implement it. But we are contemplating it. We're still going to comply with the OPEB implementation standard, and we'll talk further of what really does OPEB and pension do for the system's financial statements.
No, recording the liabilities is good, but it's
Well, I think one comes along with the other.
tedious starting
Yeah.
to read all this.
I think one comes along with the other still, and again, we're in this business of issuing bonds. I think that really what's important. I think that if a disclosure was to mention what our true liability was without going through all of this, and say that we didn't comply with that, I think we can get to the same place. But that's my opinion. Yeah, sure.
I just want to add, we did have this discussion at the beginning of the audit and kind of took it off the table for this year because their comparative statements and the prior year were audited by other auditors. So if we did that, I'd kind of be we'd be ripping out half their disclosures and still relying on their opinions. So
Disclose it.
we just kind of took that off the table for this year, reconsider next year.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr.
And this is not to say that we will do it. It's just, it brings back to
We're
the point
talking
that we've
about it.
gotten comments of the amount of paper we're using for that type of liability.
Just wanted to follow up with you on a question that Michelle asked. When it relates to water liens, are you working with HRA or any other city agencies, especially New Yorkers on fixed incomes and the elderly, on how to, with processing payments or just facilitating the process, how to go about addressing that?
Yes, we've had a very, as you may be aware, this past year we renewed the lien authorization, so we did that closely in conjunction with the City Council. One of the efforts that came, and one thing that we do is we work closely with Department of Finance on that. One of the efforts that came out of those discussions from both the administration as well as from on the council side was making more efforts to be reaching out to those at-risk homeowners in terms of being able to provide them not relief, but, getting them, aware of what risk they're at sooner rather than later.
Right.
So we've put a number, we as the system had a number of efforts already in place in terms of helping those. One of them is a homeowners water assistance program, where if you do meet certain income criteria based on the HEAP program, which is the heat, the eligibility for subsidized heat assistance, that you get a reduced bill based on that. So we were looking, one of the things unfortunately that happened with the lawsuit that was brought against the system for the FY17 rate was expanding that program. So that was put on hold for implementation for fiscal year 17. It would be our intention to look at and re-up that for the fiscal year 18 rate implementation, so that we could continue those efforts to try and help as many at-risk homeowners as possible with their water bills, and to keep as many people out of lien sale as possible.
I appreciate that. I mean, it's concerning that there would be injunctive, basically relief or a stop on this type of an issue, when I don't know how that relates to the other component that is probably the more concerning part for those who are litigating on the water bill issue. The second question I had was with regards to the wastewater management. What investments, I mean, with the likelihood of more erratic weather, larger storms, what investments are you making? What are you anticipating when it relates to wastewater treatment and discharge when we're overwhelmed with large amounts of precipitation?
Well, we're continuing to invest in, keeping the plants themselves up to grade and being able to handle 2 times wet weather flow. The other investments that we're continuing to pursue is, and in conjunction with state DEC, what's called long-term control plan, which is to put in place those efforts that will best mitigate stormwater impacts before they hit the treatment system and before they make their contact with, water bodies surrounding the city. So we've invested, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but it's close to at least $1 billion for green infrastructure programs. We continue to look at those, and we're also continuing to look at efforts both on the expense side, which is looking at more frequent catch basin inspection and cleaning. This was also done in conjunction with the council proposing a local law for that, where we're doing that on an annual basis now instead of a once every 3 years. We're also have a number of requirements under what's called MS4, municipally separated storm source systems, for improving our stormwater treatment, before it reaches the plant as well. So we're doing both, a number of efforts on both the expense side as well as on the capital side at the treatment level, as well as in, when it reaches the street level as well, to make sure that stormwater discharge is being, managed as effectively as possible.
Right. No, that's very helpful. And the last question I had related to this actually last point was, what's the role of NYCHA as it relates to the water board and wastewater treatment? And I think there's certain, my understanding is there's certain, that NYCHA has certain control over certain of those areas. Could you explain that and how you guys coordinate when it comes to water discharges and wastewater removal? NYCHA, like any other property owner, we would be treating whatever they discharge, but we don't have any, we've been working with them on some of the green programs in terms of implementing green measures within their, their various footprints throughout the city, whether it's rain gardens, whether it's roof, roof type of system. So it's, it's very, given NYCHA's financial situation, right, it's hard for them, so we're trying to be as proactive as possible while also, recognizing the interest of the system to make sure that we're not, doing anything that's giving them anything more than we would to any other, customer. Okay, and as with regards to Legionnaire's disease, are you guys involved with those water towers that are above the buildings, or is that a NYCHA?
That was more of a Department of Health responsibility.
Okay.
We had some ancillary responsibility, but most of that is, when it was pertaining to either NYCHA facilities or hospital facilities, those entities were responsible for making sure the cooling towers that were primarily the cause of, that were leading into their HVAC systems that, propagated the Legionnaires, that is, falls under their jurisdiction. It really had nothing to do with the water system or, our responsibilities there.
Thank you.
Bernie, I have a couple of technical things. Why do you have on page 31 hundreds of millions of dollars of balances at banks and they're not collateralized? That's footnote 4.
So we have certain investments in our debt reserve. Those investments have to be liquidated because of our covenants. They have to be liquidated as of June 30th into a cash position. And this is a reflective of what we have in those debt reserve accounts, and it's reflective of what we need to do to be in compliance with our.
No, I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm suggesting that when you have that much in bank balances today, one tends to ask the bank to collateralize the deposit, so you're more secure that the money is actually there. And I don't, most of the other financial statements I see.
Right, so I'm not too sure if this is actually collateralized in our, we do, I don't know if we know that answer, if this is collateralized. Yeah, this is only as of June 30th, right?
So it's an end of month thing, so it's reflected June 30th, but it's not carried.
What was that, Alan?
So this is an end of month requirement of our indenture. So you're looking at June 30th, which is an end of month, and so this is a temporary investment, very brief, before a reinvestment in other. Is that fair?
Yes, and I don't think I can answer the question because if that is actually collateralized, I don't think so, right?
No, you said it isn't.
It isn't, right?
No,
right,
you
but
said
we
it
didn't
is.
collateralize it at all. No, and I'm not too sure if there's a reason for that.
But
also,
we
'cause
we
have
get
to
back
look
to
at
you.
that.
Most
get
of the
back to you.
time, when
Yeah.
you see anything
Right.
of this number, it's collateralized.
Yeah.
And the banks are used to it. The other question, it relates to the management letter. And it's a very polite way of saying get stuffed. What's the auditor response to the management response to your audit comments?
Sure. So I'm going to turn that over to Omar.
Turn it to Warren. Go ahead,
No.
Warren
Oh,
was
I'm
ready to
sorry.
answer it.
Wait a minute, to Warren. Okay.
Well, I think, these are comments that we kind of frequently see from our IT auditor folks. So they're not out of the norm.
You're gonna
Most of the
go-
responses,
gonna be
there's an
like
indication that they've considered some of
Yeah.
these ideas in the past and will reconsider them. I don't think you'll see any of the responses that are affirm, yes, we're going to do this. So I think they're under consideration. We'll see how they come when we get to next year. We'll see what's been implemented.
Well, I always like to know how you feel as the auditor about the response to your comments. And I got the answer.
If I could just follow up on the management letter, it was interesting to me that there seemed to be some disagreement as to the, at least cost beneficial balance for your recommendations. Talking to Warren here. But I think it was very good to point out that there were no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses identified. So if I understand correctly, Warren, and maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, I hope not, but it seems like while these were your recommendations kind of on a best practice level, that you didn't think that any of these were sort of make or break issues.
No, none of these are significant deficiencies or material weaknesses in internal control. Our folks tend to be kind of wordy in their comments, so you might look and say this is a 8 or 9 page management letter comment, but the comments can really be boiled down into a couple of categories on password management, account auditing, and one that there is agreement on is the business continuity, having that pulled together in one plan. So, I think these are things that should be considered, but not every recommendation is something that has to be implemented. There can be compensating controls, or there can be situations where it's just not cost beneficial to do. But we like to point them out.
Thank you.
DEP is pulling together a working group from the IT department, the customer service division.
Speak into the mic, so if you don't mind.
DEP is pulling together a working group drawn from the IT department, the customer service department, the finance people, to look at these, see what can be done in a cost-effective way, and then to make changes appropriately. The disaster continuity number 5, which is probably the most significant one, is a set of policies we have, but they're not cleanly codified in a 3-ring binder in one convenient place. So that's probably the most important one we're looking at in terms of pulling those together in a way we can easily distribute and point to in the future.
I was going to ask, you have a pretty large reserve for uncollectibles, and I think people are paying a little better now, and we have the tax liens, you know, as a stick. Are they too high, or Warren? Are the reserves a little too high for uncollectible? I mean, if you wrote them down, let's say, it wouldn't be cash, but it would be revenue, right? And it would go in the mix.
Yeah, I mean, we look at the analysis that the management prepares, and we found their methodology for calculating the reserve to be consistent from prior years based
It's
upon.
the standard, they've used that for many years, I guess, now.
We have, and what we do is actually we look at the reports from DEP of no pay and late pay, and we come up with analysis. I think that I actually think it's conservative, especially when we have a no pay over 2 years. You know, individuals who haven't paid over 2 years, where we put 100% of that into our calculations. So although that number is high, that could be just lingering amounts that people are still owing out to us.
See, there were many years ago, there were a lot of problems with, Alan will remember, with collecting the bills.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's been a tremendous improvement. So that was why I raised the question. And then if you write it down and you have the revenue, it goes in the mix, and maybe you don't have to have a rate increase. It's not cash, I mean, but at least it's in the mix, for want of a better term.
If I could also interject.
What?
If I can interject, I think what Bernie is saying is, in light of the automatic metered system and the higher rates of collection in recent years, that while it is indeed consistent with prior year calculations for the reserve, that maybe it's due a fresh look in light of higher collection rates to see if the reserve calculation should maybe be updated to reflect that.
Given the analysis that we do, I think someone who hasn't paid, and we reported 5 years ago, we're still reporting that same no pay now. I think maybe more of the analysis should take a look at is that if this is something that we are going to eventually collect, and maybe on a customer level, DEP could actually look at these accounts that have not paid for a long time and say, you know, should we truly write this off and take this down? Once they do that, then that would of course change our analysis, because when we're getting these reports, these amounts are eliminated from that report. But as long as that is a reportable item and still a doable item, I think that if somebody didn't pay 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and they're still there, I think we should continue to report that. I think more so, I think it's more of a, maybe we should just, concentrate our efforts and see if some of these customer accounts can be written off, especially if they've been out there for a few years. I don't think we have a city write-off policy. I think this is something that...
That may be, no, okay. that may be, that would be helpful.
Yeah, my recollection is that there had been discussions about write-offs, but because of the liens being there, there was a legal consideration that ultimately these are all considered collectible because they can be collected when the property is sold. So I think that was a conscious decision years ago to address that by virtue of a higher reserve. But it's possible that should be re-examined.
I mean, one of the things that we do is a retrospective review, where you look at the prior year's reserves as you gain history.
No.
And see if there's a tendency to over or under reserve and reach conclusions reasonable.
Based on your management letter, there's a tremendous amount of data, I think, and data processing and, being fully utilized. That's why I asked the question, I mean, it sounds like you're fully implemented on collecting rates, sending data, so on and so forth, so I imagine it's there.
I have one last question.
Go
On
ahead, sir.
page 43, you talk about during fiscal is 15, you defeased something, and you had an accounting loss, and in other paragraphs above, you talk about the economic benefit. Why didn't you talk about it here?
The economic
Is
benefit
the
under funding?
It's the penultimate paragraph leaves out the economic benefit, and all the other paragraphs have something.
All right.
Was there no economic benefit? I can't believe that.
Okay, so on which paragraph? Wait.
Second paragraph from the
Second.
bottom.
These were old water bonds, Alan? Were
Yeah,
these
yeah.
the, was these the old bonds that the city issued, or this is what the authority issued?
No, so we took out old bonds, okay, so we did.
When I say old, I mean before you people were.
The
or no?
GO before the system.
No, I don't think so.
No,
I think that.
This was by the, no, I was just trying.
This was just a business decision of just taking out bonds that were callable at the time and had a higher interest rate. So yes, I agree. We should have had some statement here to actually say what,
consistent.
to be totally transparent.
I'll give you some other stuff you don't want to hear.
Do we have any more questions from the committee? If not, thank you. It's a good set of statements, and the management letter, I think, was pretty good, too. Thank you. I think the next order of business is the Hudson Yards.
We're going to bring up another,
Oh, you have to stay for that?
I'm here for the duration.
I'm glad to say, honestly, I know you're long.
If you're getting up, yes, sir. You guys want to pick up some grammar?
Ask him.
Always.
Always. I'll give it to you later.
Yes, please.
What are we on now, Bernie?
And the Hudson Yards.
Hudson Yards. That's where we're going.
Bob, you want to introduce?
Yes.
Are you on the Hudson Yards, too?
Yeah, I'm here with Alan.
Okay.
The duration and
One of 7 Mark Page innovations.
Pardon me?
One of, I think, 7 Mark Page innovations we're going to
Okay.
talk about.
Yeah.
No, Hudson Yards,
So-
well,
So, I'm actually the controller of the Hudson Yards Infrastructure Corporation. Alan, in his role here, is the president of the Hudson Yards Infrastructure Corporation, and the auditors remain the same. And who I'd like to introduce is to the far left, actually, is Jason J. Olson, who is the treasurer for Hudson Yards, and we have Angela Cavalucci, who's now the president of Hudson Yards.
Development Corporation.
The Hudson Yards Development. So these are actually
but
two
they
entities
have
we
no
talked about.
employees. They're employees of OMB, right?
For Hudson Yards, they
The-
are the Hudson Yards Infrastructure Corporation. They are the employees of actually
Oh, so they are
Water.
employed by them.
of the water system. So they're not. But for Hudson Yards Development Corporation, which is now just, I guess, 2 individuals,
I owe
which is
you.
Angela and Lincoln Patel, they are employees of the Development Corporation. So, yeah.
So maybe just a couple words of overview, including how the 2 organizations fit together. First of all, we're at the end of a long road here. If you remember, the first Hudson Yard, $2 billion was raised in 2006, fiscal 2007, and then another $1 billion in fiscal year 2011. The idea was $3 billion to extend the number 7 line, which came from Shea Stadium to
Which is extended
Times
now.
Square. It was extended, and
You gotta build another station, I think.
a
Right,
second
yeah.
entrance to the first station. There's
Pardon me?
the second entrance to the
Second
first station. Yes, and so a little bit over $2 billion was for the city to fund the subway. First time we've done that quite some time, but this is entirely city funded. And a little bit under $1 billion for some public amenities, basically a boulevard and park going north of the entrance, because there are people coming to the far west side to work and to live. And so HYDC is primarily responsible for dealing with, although we're involved as well, the MTA. Before the MTA requisitions any money, we have sign-offs from both organizations, and before we pay them, before HYIC releases the money. And Angela and her predecessors as well supervise EDC in basically constructing the public amenities, the park and the boulevard, and also in dealing with developers in many respects. HYIC was the bond issuer, and we're the custodian of the monies on behalf of bondholders. And we're over 95% done. In your audit year, in August.
The platform was built over the yards?
Yes, well, that's another thing. When we were talking about this, it goes all the way back to 2002 or so. We needed a rezoning of that sort of wasteland of auto body shops, west of Penn Station. So all that was done, and Mark Page and Dan Doctoroff would be making presentations on the vision here, which is just like Upper Park Avenue at the beginning of the 20th century needed a platform just north of the Grand Central, which was sort of key to the finalization of the Central Business District for New York and the great success of the city. We envisioned a platform over at least the eastern rail yards. It turned out to be the western as well, because we didn't build a stadium. That's another old story.
The west side, but they call it the eastern.
Yeah. So yes, so we got the Related company as the primary developer. There are other developers as well.
Which one is it again?
Related, which was responsible for at Columbus Circle, the Time Warner building, which is now going to move into Hudson Yards, lock, stock, and barrel. So yes, we always said the vision was if we extended the subway, the development would come to pay for it. Mm-hmm. And the city council agreed to make interest support payments. We had no principal until for 10 or 15 years. That the development would come. The development actually was so pent up for large space commercial towers as well as residential towers that the development actually started to come well before the subway opened, which was the ribbon cutting for the first entrance to the station in August of 2015. So that's within your audit year of 2016. And in addition, the development, there are 6 or 7 or 8 major towers which are changing the skyline of the city. One of them is going to be the second tallest tower in Manhattan over these rail yards, just as envisioned. So it's very impressive. Angela's been involved in all of this, and she can, if you want to talk more about exactly where we are, Angela, you want to say a couple words? We've been...
Well, just, very excited about, sorry, is it on?
Yes, just pull it forward.
Very excited about, in some of my prior roles, actually, I was on the City Planning Commission and was, saw the vision of the zoning occur, and now I'm very excited and had worked on the other end of in the mayor's office for capital project development, and Hudson Yards was a priority project, so have been working on this for quite some time. New to Hudson Yards Development Corporation, but we have worked with the designated developer Related on the sites, the 4 buildings and the retail, the 4 buildings and the retail that are on the eastern rail yards. 10 Hudson Yards, which is the first building, is the Coach Building. It's also known as the Coach Building, is fully committed. And
Coach Leather. Yeah.
Right. And then there's some, and they're building what we call Tower D, but it's actually 15 Hudson Yards, 30 Hudson Yards, and 35 Hudson Yards are all under construction, and also the retail component, and also the cultural facility, facility, the shed, is also under construction. So we see most of those projects on the eastern rail yards being completed by 2019. That's the goal. And then Related also bought the properties just north of the eastern rail yard, so they actually call that a part of the Hudson Yards as well, and that's 55 Hudson Yards, which is under construction as well, and then 50 Hudson Yards, which will be under construction, and that's the one that has been recently discussed in the newspapers, that BlackRock will be one of the tenants. And then the other building that I was talking about, 30 Hudson Yards, that's where Time Warner will be going.
So we needed some place that could be the focal point for retaining the largest corporations who needed a new corporate headquarters.
Yes.
So in addition to BlackRock, Wells Fargo, Time Warner, it's really a key to the economic future of the city. The last two things I wanted to mention, I said the city council agreed that they would, subject to appropriation, make interest payments until the development was sufficient to make this self-supporting. 15 or 20 years after the first bond issue. The development has come so quickly that in fiscal year 16, which is over, fiscal year, and is your audit year, fiscal year 17, the current year, and fiscal year 18, we are not budgeting any interest support payments because we're getting developer payments sufficient to pay all of the interest. When these buildings are constructed, ahead of the construction, there are zoning provisions that allow the developer to apply for additional height by making payments to Hudson Yards. And those in the early stages have been sufficient now to pay, in addition to other revenues, we have the interest, $153 million of interest a year. And then we knew we would get to the point around 2020, 2022 or so, where there would be a crossover. Not that the city wouldn't still be obligated if something went terribly wrong to make interest support payments, but where the ongoing revenues, which are pilot revenues basically on the commercial development, and what we call TEP, tax equivalency payments on retail and hotel, it's equivalent to the pilot. At some point, $153 million a year of interest, maybe $200 million once we start amortizing. By 2030, 2040, we're going to be bringing in $1.5 billion of additional revenues to the city. This is going to be a great money maker. I mean, it makes sense. Big commercial development equal to already downtown Brooklyn. So it's really huge, bigger than many other cities across the country. And it's a great, looking at OMB, revenue source for the city, expanding the tax base of the city.
Very good explanation. What I was going to say, do you have to pay, I don't remember, we had to pay for the air rights over the eastern rail yards?
Well,
to
we
MTA
are
or-
selling air rights.
Pardon me?
We are selling air rights. We actually, those are owned by the MTA.
Yeah, right.
The
Oh, yeah, go
The
ahead.
MTA and we all agreed that in terms of
I think I'm
the
getting-
legwork here to sell those development rights for additional height for the developers, that we, HYDC and HYIC, had the people devoted to that. So the first $200 million of those air rights that we needed to sell to developers plus interest, we bought those with the original bond issue, and we've been selling off those air rights and getting those revenues
Very well done.
for investors.
That's well done.
In fact, during this reporting period, we sold $100 million of the TDRs.
Of air rights.
Yes.
Well, that's TDRs, and then there's development bonuses, DIB, and the combination of those two, or why we're not asking the city council for any appropriations to pay interest.
I guess the plan is kind of under construction, but it's fully implemented. You know where all the buildings will be and so on and so forth. I think that's what you were implying, ma'am. It's done. They're not finished yet, but
Well, in the eastern rail yards and the western rail yards, actually, there's already a plan for those buildings,
Building.
and in Related is looking to begin construction on the western rail yards. So yes, there's a plan in place for those, and the zoning is all set, up the boulevard, and we have completed the first 3 blocks of the park They opened around the same time as the
terrific.
first entrance opened up, and then we have a phase 2 of the park, and we're looking to do that with the developers as an in-kind contribution that relates to the DIB as that moves forward and as the development moves north.
As you started to say, it was all old automobile shops, body shops, junk, and look at it now.
Yes, amazing, right.
It's amazing, it really is.
The towers went up, and then the places for people to go buy food and have restaurants.
Yeah.
There's
No.
now a 4-star restaurant in the area on 36th Street.
Which one?
I haven't been over to.
We're going to be a tenant, that's why.
You should have bought Third Avenue building, but you don't listen to me.
I
No,
didn't think they were anything
I
higher
always
than 3
say, I was, when I retired from the city, I went to do a little consulting at the MTA, and when Catherine Lapp was the executive director, she called me into the office, and there was this guy talking about this area. I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. Though I'm an old New Yorker, I didn't know, unless you're gonna live in Manhattan and have a car that got banged up, you'll go to it, He said, and he was right, what a potential. What a potential, and of course the rail yards are a potential too. And the
last frontier, really. It's the last.
me?
It's the last frontier in Manhattan for
Yeah,
any
no,
kind of
that's
development
it.
at all.
That's it.
Yeah.
And the construction over the rail yard can actually take all that height.
Oh, yes.
A lot of attention to what's called overbuild.
We're going to find out, Bernie.
No, it's there was.
I'll call you from my office someday.
Go ahead, Mr. Khan.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a question. If companies are moving from Midtown or Columbus Circle to Hudson Yards, what is the real value add to the city if they're just moving locations from one facility to another? Are they
question.
inuring any other benefits, any other tax benefits, any other anything else?
Well, the pilot, certainly there is an incentive in the pilot agreements, which that are it's a multi-phase discount on taxes to a limited degree. The first come, first serve, and then it phases out in years 18, 19, and 20. So there is an incentive, but they get and the city gets basically the large footprint development. Modern development where you're going to put an 80, 90-story tower with the primary tenant occupying a good part of it. That's more capacity than they have in Midtown. Now, of course, all of this does not that the Midtown buildings aren't going to be occupied. It's sort of, there's a cycle of the tenants that and different. You're not going to have a Wells Fargo, perhaps in Wells Fargo's building, but you're going to have other in Midtown as they move to Hudson Yards. So it's incentivized, but there's a great need. There was a great need to retain these corporations to have large footprint development.
No, I appreciate that. But so, for example, AOL Time Warner moved into Columbus Circle about 15, 20 years ago, less than that, right? And so now they're moving, that was the Coliseum back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And, the development of that area. Yes, Bernie, you're probably impressed that I knew that.
You said it was a good question. Take a compliment when you can get it.
So, I guess...
Let me interrupt you a minute. I don't mean to do it. I never do it. That's what they call progress, right?
No, I appreciate that. And so
No, I
I
understand
think
the
that's
question.
phenomenal. And that's this neighborhood I lived in. And so, but my question is are we reducing the revenues for the city when people move from one location, if we're subsidizing Time Warner essentially from moving from Columbus Circle to now Hudson Yards?
No, there's a great increase in the net revenues. Putting on my O&B hat, so and part of the answer is the transformation with progress in the city real estate market. You've got downtown being transformed and being, paying plenty of taxes where Tom Pellicelli lived. A lot of it's now residential, condo rather than office. And then you've got Midtown being transformed whether it's Columbus Circle. It's not as if Time Warner moves out and then Columbus Circle is vacant. There's just huge demand, pent-up demand, right now of all time, because of the global economy and people wanting to be in New York. There's
I think
more
that
demand.
the difference is, I'm saying, what I'm trying to articulate, perhaps I'm being unclear, is that perhaps it's more beneficial to give benefits to new people coming in as opposed to existing entities that are already here, in order to truly bring in a new footprint and a new businesses and new corporations to the city, as opposed to existing members of our great city.
I think that's a fair comment. I mean, this was the plan. You can have many plans, and also I shouldn't create the impression that all of the development that's going into Hudson Yards is incentivized. It's the first come, first serve. And then you go to a lower level of, we're already below the top level of incentives. And so, and the rest of it will be paying close to full taxes through their pilot payments.
And it's our understanding, too, that, with the Time Warner, they are actually growing, and they want to consolidate into a bigger building. And I think, historically, what's happened, usually New York City spawns smaller businesses, and then they grow, and I think it's just the way that will happen, and then the medium-sized companies can move into the old Time Warner, and it's sort of the way that it's typically grown.
Let me comment as a representative of one of the tenants. The advantage of moving lock, stock, and barrel into new space, even from space that's 15 years old, is that you can get modernized in the new space, which you couldn't do efficiently in the old space. You would tear yourself apart while you try to rejigger it. For what's remarkable to me, the change in the way you lay out offices since we moved in 15, 18 years ago. And we looked at whether we would stay or move, and we're moving not only because the rent's better, but because in order to rejigger our space would tear us apart
for cost and the delays and everything else. No, I appreciate
so what happens is when we move out, the landlord can then take that space, rejigger it to modernize it. And it's hard for me to believe that 15 years in, it needs to be modernized, but it does.
That's fine.
And that's what helps it. It brings the new tenant in.
Just one last thing. The chairman mentioned a second subway station, and you mentioned a second subway entrance.
Right.
So what is the thoughts toward, from my recollection of news reports, the capacity is there to add another tunnel at some point. What is your thinking towards the development of that area and adding that second subway station, which was originally envisioned?
Right. So we before we did the first transaction, we had to cost it out, decide how much what seemed like was financially viable, how much that could buy us. And so the public amenity, the Park and Boulevard, there were 6 lots north of the subway entrance, and we basically said we would do the first 3. We actually, at the end, in the last couple of years, we've been working on the 4th lot. But so we have two more to go that they can be financed by the city, by Hudson Yards, whatever. The second entrance at the top, which frankly would be serving more residential than commercial, which is not paying for this because residential development typically doesn't pay taxes for 15, 20 years. And we did provide so that it's not putting in an additional tunnel. The 2 tunnels are there, and we wanted to provide that if we wanted to turn that into a second station, we wouldn't have to shut down the number 7 line. That would be catastrophic. So the trains go through there. The tunnels would have to be built around those tubes. The cost, even when we decided not to do them, was around $1 billion. Now it would be more like $1.5 billion, and I've just inquired about that of the MTA, so that I sort of had an update. So it would be a big commitment. A future mayor or this mayor in the second term could conceivably do that. Right now, it is not contemplated that would be done. We're trying to finish the current project.
And you fixed the water leaks?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
we spent a lot of time on water leaks. Yes.
Let me tweak you just a little bit.
Uh-huh.
In page 30, you say money market fund, you have treasury securities at level 1. In your other document, you had treasury securities at level 2.
And I
Explain me the
will-
difference.
And it's no difference than that we need to make them all consistent.
Okay.
I think we
The
have-
other thing I'd like to take a point of my colleague on
and-
the right.
and-
You have pages in these documents about the employee, the retirement system, and there are pages in these documents about accounting pronouncements, or new Gatsby stuff, that
That's
you
not-
say are not applicable.
They have to include it. It's
Now, is that required by GAAP, that you must include
By
stuff that is
Gatsby, I
not?
think.
You could save 4 or 5 pages. Think of the amount of ink and paper
Yes.
to save.
Yeah, so we have to discuss the standard and how it would not impact us, to show that we've actually
It seems
looked
such
at
a
it and
waste.
considered it. Yeah, they've been very busy, as you can see.
Yes.
Can I just add one thing on the levels? You can have some treasury securities can either fall into level 1 or 2. If you have short-term bills that are actively traded and you can find a quote for that CUSIP number, it can be level 1. If it's longer term and you don't have active trades.
Yeah, but they say in
End
here
of the
that
year.
all the securities are short-term. I made my point, that's.
Yeah, but we'll work with them.
Do we have any other questions on the Hudson Yard Development or Infrastructure Corporation? If not, we should move on to the
TFA?
Yeah,
So,
that was a good thing, too.
so with the TFA, it's Alan.
You're
Yeah, I'm the controller for these.
Where do you
Until
hang your
I say
hat?
I'm not the controller, and Alan is the
where do you
president of
hang your hat, in OMB or in,
At OMB, yes.
At OMB,
Yes,
okay.
yeah. So what I'd like to do is actually turn over the TFA to Jay, who's really active on the general obligation side,
getting
the
some
city
award
GO
for it.
side, and this other leg of
Yeah.
capital borrowing, which is the TFA. Jay?
Sure, thanks, Bob. A lot of familiar faces here. The Transitional Finance Authority, as we've been talking about for nearly 2 decades, not so transitional, is really a core issuer financing the city capital program. Initially, it was created.
credit, too.
Well, yes, we'll talk about that as well. To give the city additional financing capacity over and above the constitutional debt limit when the city was up against it in the late 90s and early 2000s. It was then subsequently opened up to be more open-ended, whereby debt over $13.5 billion incurred would count against the debt limit. So it wasn't giving incremental financing capacity, but was allowing the city to diversify its financing sources. And in particular, the Transitional Finance Authority future tax secured bonds are rated comparably to the United States federal government in terms of 2 AAAs and 1 AA plus or AA1 from Moody's on the subordinate lien. Additionally, the TFA issues building aid revenue bonds, and those bonds were secured by a state building aid that had been paid to the city, is now being paid directly to Transitional Finance Authority to secure debt financing specifically the city educational capital program. So TFA issues those 2 types of bonds, one for general capital purposes, the other for educational purposes. And in 2016, we issued $4.4 billion of future tax secured bonds. Those are backed by the city income tax and sales tax if needed. 3.7 for new money purposes, 400 for refinancing, and the single refinancing undertaken generated over 60 million of present value savings. Additionally, there was one issuance of building aid revenue bonds for 750 million financing the educational capital program.
No, we were up against the debt limit, the city, I remember. I was not in the government anymore, but I had heard about it, and I went and did it. And then, of course, when unfortunately 9/11 happened, the state immediately increased the borrowing authority because the city didn't have the capacity to deal with what had gone on in terms of cleanup and whatnot.
So have you ever considered changing the name?
I'm sorry.
Have you ever considered changing the name?
You know, it's become a brand name, so
It's
it,
kind of a conflict
that's a
because
good
people know
point,
what
Bud.
it is, but it's really a misstatement of
It's
what
not
you are.
transitional anymore,
right, right.
You can do what the National GAO did and change your name without changing your call letters. You could go from transitional to, say, traditional finance authority.
And you know, we felt so much better after the legislature had proposed emergency transitional finance authority that they dropped the emergency, that we got used to the transition.
And you told me that it's in the calculation now for the debt limit, the Transitional Finance Authority as well as the GO debt.
Correct.
I missed the
That when we compute our remaining debt incurring power under the constitutional limit, it's GO bonds plus other liabilities plus TFA future tax secured bonds that are over and above $13.5 billion. The first $13.5 billion don't count. Anything beyond that does.
When we wanted to increase our capacity, we had gotten to the point where with the booming city economy and so forth with regard to the GO debt limit, that we had plenty of room. So we wanted to reassure the legislature that we weren't just asking for more capacity, we wanted primarily diversification. So we put the two debt limits together.
Do the feds, is the new federal administration going to be providing the subsidies for the BARBs and for the other debt?
Well, specifically, the federal government provides a cash subsidy for Build America bonds and qualified school construction bonds, which have been issued by the TFA and also the city for that matter. The federal government thus far is continuing to pay those subsidies, and we're continuing to operate as business as usual. And, you know, we're not aware of any changes afoot, and, you know, there's speculation abounds, but we're continuing as business as usual, and that's how it's been thus far.
The MTA, I remember, was using some, he had worked for you people, I can't remember his name.
Pat,
yeah, they were buying, they were also issuing BARBs for a while.
Well,
Babs.
Build America bonds and building aid revenue bonds, two different things. So we're issuing building aid revenue bonds, which is a type of bond the TFA only issues secured by the building aid. That's not to be confused with Build America bonds, which was a federal program coming out of
Thank you for
ERA.
the clarification.
Sorry, I know all these acronyms.
They and we both took advantage of the federally subsidized taxable bonds.
They also
Right.
they have a large capital need.
Right.
I just have a technical question. You refer to the fact that the TFA
You're not gonna
is
get
an
out
instrumentality of the state.
Well, it was created pursuant to state legislation.
Oh, but that doesn't make an instrumentality. Every corporation is an instrumentality then. This says, it looks a little odd that it's a city organization controlled by the city.
Well, you know, it was crucial to our getting the strong bond ratings we got originally. That the separation of the city's personal income tax and the sales tax, if necessary, capturing those monies upstream of the city, then paying debt service and flowing it through, that separation of those monies away from the city was done legislatively.
No,
So
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'm just asking what makes this an instrumentality of the state of New York that's not any other corporation that's also an instrumentality, because they're both created pursuant to New York state law. Why are you single?
Well, we brought everybody but our general counsel.
I mean,
we'll get you the answer to that.
Yeah, we'll take a look at.
I'm just curious.
Yes, absolutely. We'll get back to you.
That's what you get for talking to a lawyer.
I refuse to admit, despite
You're not going to
a
get
lot of efforts to admit that I actually have a law degree, but I'm not practicing law, so I'm not going to try to answer the question.
Mike was about to call you out on that.
And the other thing I have is that you've managed to sell taxable bonds at 32 basis points lower than the tax-free bonds.
The rates comparison there is a little, I wouldn't say misleading, but it doesn't take into account the maturity range. The taxable bonds we've issued are generally very, very short on the front end of the yield curve, whereas the tax-exempt bonds have been generally,
Okay.
from the shortest end all the way
You
to the
might want
longest.
to make that point.
That's a good
because
point, yeah.
It looks funny.
We could specify the maturity ranges.
And that's intentional because since the taxable is our most expensive source of finance, we borrow it short.
No, I understand.
If I may, I just wanted to just introduce Kenny Nareen to the right of me. He's actually the deputy controller. I think I have 8 of these. So if it wasn't for the folks that sit beside me, it would be hard for us to get these. Actually, this is one of our more involved financial statements since we have, we have the barbs and then we have the future tax secured bonds. And you can see the different columns here, how many columns we have to report on this level.
Let me again make a point on page 32, which is consistent with the same point I made earlier. That is, in the first 2 paragraphs, you refer to the economic benefits as the second and third paragraphs, and in the 4th paragraph, you don't refer to any economic benefit. I think if you want to be consistent, you ought to think about that.
This is the STAR funding.
Now, do you guys have your own audit committee?
Oh, sure.
Yes.
Absolutely, yes. Consisting of independent members of our boards.
Right, so the PAAA requires us to have a governance committee, the same finance committee.
And an audit committee.
You know.
Okay.
If there are no more questions from the committee, we should move on. Thank you, Jay, to the Sales Tax Asset Receivable Corporation.
Yeah, may
No.
we go,
Pardon me?
if we can, could we request that we could discuss, because usually the TSAS, the STAR, and the Securitization Corp are really non-eventful entities, but TSAS was a little bit eventful, so if we could discuss TSAS next, if that's okay with you.
The other 2 entities are inactive, completely inactive, and TSAS hasn't been.
The
so-
Star is completely inactive.
Yeah,
Yes. But we can do STAR,
sure,
too.
if you want to.
Your Star bonds will be outstanding till about 2030 something, I think.
Right.
That's too.
But there's no, we had our refinancing, so
That's it.
that's over, and
I'd like to get rid of anything, I'd like to get rid of any
Putting this together,
thing that relates to MAC. Because it's a
You did visit
vestige
it,
of the fiscal
Bob.
crisis.
I had that as
Yes.
several.
MAC took a lot of credit for solving the crisis, which they shouldn't. There were a lot of people who did a lot of things. You can ask Mark. And, I've always been bothered. I'm glad that you're going to finally, the fiscal crisis was about 40 years ago.
Yeah.
yes.
So you're still going to have the bonds outstanding, let's see, it's 2016, about another 20 years.
Right.
All right, what can we do? So there's nothing to discuss, you're saying?
Unless, since we're here, unless anyone has anything to discuss on
All
this.
right.
So.
So
The same with the fiscal year 2005 securitization corp. That was a one-time
Pardon me?
transaction. This is a mouthful. Fiscal year 2005 securitization corporation. It has been inactive for several years. We talk about it when we come in, that it was a one-time transaction.
When will that be finished?
2020, I believe, is the last principal.
We're getting there, getting close.
See, you promised me you're not going to do any more refundings?
I don't think we could do anything.
No, those bonds aren't callable.
No, seriously.
Yeah, no, we can't. We
You
yeah.
can't.
It's in an escrow accounts that actually pays out
That
the last.
securitization was, you people, debt service savings are nice. I can appreciate that. The city needs money. Debt service saving is good. It helps the city. It helps the people.
So which
And
one are we on now, Bernie? I'm totally confused.
The last-
They want to
TSAC?
do TSACs.
Okay.
Because there's been no activity in the other two, they just had to issue the reports,
Okay.
and
So I am the controller of TSAS, and Alan.
how do you keep
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It was tough at the beginning. I was
Now
mixing
we
up the acronyms.
We rehearse all this with our own
No,
audit
no.
committees. So
Let's go.
Okay, so for TSAS, we can. I'm going to actually we can talk about the refunding. Actually, there was a
There's still
settlement.
money coming in.
Yeah, there's money coming in. There was actually a settlement that happened here. So I actually let me turn it over
It was a
to.
tobacco settlement,
That's
but
right.
what is there still money?
there was the, go ahead.
No, I mean, the tobacco settlement was basically in exchange for the states not continuing to sue the tobacco companies over health care claims.
Okay.
The settlement was basically, all right, the states can stand down on the litigation.
Yeah.
The tobacco companies will essentially pay the states money forever based on a variety of formulas. So the money continues into perpetuity to,
State
TSAS.
risks of debt.
So as long as the debt is outstanding, and then when it's not, to the city. The city and TSAS aren't directly parties to the settlement, but they're beneficiaries of the settlement. And the city was the first to securitize its interest in the settlement revenues. And there had been some developments
do
with
it.
regard to the settlement.
Yes, I noticed that Fitch has lost
The
confidence.
pledged is the
Well-
money that you got. Let me put it this way, the pledged is more certain than the unpledged?
No, what happens is all the money is paid to TSASC, but there is a split between pledged and unpledged in terms of what is payable to bondholders to discharge the debt versus the remainder paid to the
Thank you.
city. So
Thank
there's
you for the
around
clarification.
37% paid for debt service, the remainder to the city.
Okay. Thank
Now,
you.
there was, through the history of this, what Jay's referring to, in addition, that the certain of the tobacco companies and non-participating manufacturers had the right to challenge our enforcement of the collections of these monies, particularly on Indian reservations, and to escrow the monies that they otherwise would pay to us in the meantime. So 2 years ago, 2014, we actually had a resolution from 10 years prior and freed up those monies. Last spring, we actually had a total settlement of this, and we actually had $66 million that went to TSASC, $110 million to the city as a result of the freeing up of those escrowed monies. So this was a major clarification. Doesn't preclude future litigation. It was specifically said that, but as of now, it seems like we're out from under that cloud. It strengthened the credit. It also, among other things, allowed us to do a refinancing over the Christmas holidays, this past beginning of New Year's. We had lost almost all of our investment grade ratings, as did all the other tobacco financing entities across the country. So we were able to do a refinancing that, in part by stretching a little bit, we were able to get investment grade ratings on all of our TSAS bonds, A ratings on the senior bonds that were not turbo bonds, so-called, and to basically improve the break-even level. The question is, it's anticipated by the feasibility analysts that consumption of tobacco will continue to go down 3% a year. So we were able to increase our break-even to something like 5.7%. In other words, tobacco consumption could continue to go down more than the
3%.
experts predict, and we still are in good shape. And so that's resulted in the upgrades for the TSAS bonds. So this is, my personal view, this is a little bit of a housekeeping thing. I mean, we never said the city was liable for this. But on the other hand, it did help the capital program when we issued these bonds. And so this was our opportunity. Why not strengthen the ratings, It makes the investors feel good about the city that we did that, and it also diminishes the risk by a considerable amount that TSAS would ever be in trouble as tobacco consumption continued to decline.
And the bonds, you can issue them for general capital purposes, is that it?
Those were issued for general capital purposes.
sorry, sir?
They were issued for general capital purposes, and the bond sale Alan's alluding to is refinancing of that debt.
Okay.
So there's no new money
It
proceeds.
was the refunding that,
Yes,
I
yes.
got it.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question?
I'm sorry?
May I
Yes,
ask a
Michelle,
question?
yeah.
Can you speak a little bit more about the change in terms for the new bonds that provided additional security to the bondholders? Is the split between the city and the bondholders different? What other terms changed?
Well, I'm sorry.
Well, no, the split didn't change. We did stretch the maturities a bit. That's sort of the classic way of doing this.
What's a bit?
Without stretching, actually improving the expected amortization. So the expected amortization stayed the same. Given all the change, given the settlement, we took advantage of the settlement, but with the nominal maturity was extended. But it's the same percentages, 37%, and I don't know what 100 less 37 is, but whatever it is, going to the city did not change.
How much was the extension? How far out did you push these?
Well, it's a stated maturity went out a couple of years, but that's
What's a couple of years? 2 years? 3
maybe
years?
3 or 4. I'd have
Got
to go
it.
back and look. But the point here is that the repayment really is more driven by the amount of revenue flowing
Yes,
through.
I understand.
So, the stated maturity is really just, a statement, but the repayment will be driven by the level of revenue going. So as revenue picks up, we're going to pay down more principal and the debt will be discharged more quickly. That said, the senior bonds did have fixed maturities, so their actual nominal stated maturity is much shorter, and that allows us to reduce the interest cost considerably, which allows us to commit more money to pay down principal in sort of a virtuous cycle.
Thank you.
This entity doesn't pay tax, right?
No.
Correct.
Why then would you be having investments in municipal bonds?
Well,
as
those
distinguished from
were
tax-free?
taxable municipal bonds, so
okay.
that actually gave us a fair bit more yield than, let's say, over
Okay.
treasuries.
I can only suggest that anybody reading this may come to the same question I do. and you
Well,
may wanna
we
ca-
actually had to liquidate everything in connection with the refinancing that
So it's
Alan
not relevant
discussed.
anymore.
So when we have this discussion next year, it will be far less interesting.
Okay. I would only suggest you just show.
I'm sorry,
I wanted to just make a clarification on the ratings question. On the new bonds, the rating agency.
Excuse me, Carol, would you just
Oh.
introduce yourself for the record?
Oh, I'm sorry. This is Carol Kostick, Deputy Controller for Public Finance.
Yes.
And I serve on the TSAS board. The rating agency that rates tobacco bonds, Standard & Poor's, does not provide ratings for bonds that mature longer than 30 years. So when we extended the maturity, we had to create some bonds that are not rated at this point. Our expectation is that, we've actually covenanted with the holders of the bonds that when we come within that 30-year time period that allows us to be rated, we will seek ratings, and we expect that we would get low investment grade ratings at that time. But just to clarify that not all of the bonds are rated investment grade now. There are just some that are non-rated.
That's helpful.
Thank you.
And I guess the money that you've gotten from the tobacco settlement is adequate to cover all your debt service needs.
By definition, yes. That, the pledged amount pays first interest and then the remainder principal, and in every year we've been paying down principal.
It's a good deal.
Yep.
But for smoking, for that garbage, sure. Do we have any more questions for Mr. Olson or Mr. Anders? If not,
Okay.
Have we adequately dealt with again, just a mouthful, the fiscal year 2005 securitization corporation. Again, totally
Nothing in there.
just waiting for the final maturity
I
in
always thought you
2021.
were crazy to even enter into the securitization thing. You had a little money, so you had to securitize it, all right.
No.
I remember was,
We had money in an escrow.
Yeah, you
Interest
decided.
rates went down, and so the escrow was worth more.
Yeah, if
So
you
what we
secure-
wanted to do was to take that excess out and give it to the city
Okay.
and substitute
it's a
new
good
bond
thing to do.
proceeds.
you did a good thing.
All right.
Debt service savings are always welcome. Really, they always are.
So we have a little transition for our last presentation. This is the tax,
What would that be?
the tax lien. This is,
Oh, you're there for that too, Alan.
this is, well, Bob is not. This is the first one.
So let him go home, yeah.
Okay.
Which one is this one now,
Are you
Bernie?
coming over to our side for this
Tax
one? No.
lien.
Okay.
And we have people from, I'm sorry, sweetheart.
Hello, everybody.
Yeah, okay, all right. The people want a 5-minute break, so I'd like you
Sure.
to, thank you.
Weak bladders.
I'm sorry. How are things in the Buffalo area, sir?
I teach the guys.
Not snowing?
It was all guys. You wonder which one we're doing now.
It's,
Which
well,
year?
there's,
I'll
go ahead,
explain.
kind of introduce the subject.
Oh, this is the,
Okay, this is the tax lien sale, and we have two firms here, and after a couple brief comments by me, I'll let them explain their relative roles. So, Joe Kim of Toski, thank you very much, and CB Thomas from Seth Paneth, and we'll let them, as I said, explain exactly how the two firms relate to each other and to us. So this is 2016 was the 22nd year of tax lien sales. I have Tom Gallagher from, we used to call him our financial advisor, but they're really LePerc is our program manager. They've been here since 1996, which is the first lien sale. And we actually have a second deputy program manager in reserve, so if anything ever happened to Tom and his associates crossing the street, but they've been with us from the beginning. I was reflecting with Bernie during the break about the in-rem program that the city used to have, which was extremely expensive, resulted in a big inventory of properties, sort of a gnashing of teeth when we had to take properties away from small homeowners, and it just really didn't work and was very expensive. So starting in 1996, we created the tax lien sale. And this year, for example, in 2016, we had proceeds of $54 million, of which $43 million went to DOF for property taxes that were in arrears, and $11 million to DEP. So, you can say, well, I mean, yeah, that's $66 million. That's a lot of money, but is that really, why is that transformative? Well, the reason is that we're not really looking for the revenues that we collect. We're looking for the incentive it gives this whole process for people to be noticed that they owe back taxes and to prepay. So I always look at the 90-day notice, which goes out 90 days before. It was $890 million,
wow,
of which we got it down to $54 million 3 months later. It's a great
So when they
mechanism.
get that notice, they pay.
They pay. I don't know if you've seen, if you look at the New York Post and the Daily News, it basically, there's a day that it's sort of 3 times the size of the other days, and there are lists of people in the centerfold that are published by law, and it really works. It's a great vehicle. It has maintained our high payment rate on property taxes, which has always been, depending on the year and the recession and so forth, 92, 97. But it's also enhanced the DEP water bill collections enormously in that transformation from when the water bills went out with the property taxes to when DEP started billing themselves. So given that background, I can call in Joe, and you can, and then we'll go to CB. And
Sure.
Great.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Joe Kem. I'm the partner on the tax lien trust engagements. We've actually been doing them for
Tusky and Company.
Tusky and Company, upstate New York. I will tell you that the weather up there is not much different than here. My daughter wanted a winter wedding. This past weekend, she got a May wedding because it was 60 degrees and sunny. But that's okay. That's okay. Oh, thank you. Thank you. We are the auditors for the 4 entities that have financial statements issued. And we basically, from our standpoint, we issued unmodified opinions on each of the entities. Each of the entities also had a yellow book government auditing standards report with no internal, no matters either compliance related or internal controls related that we needed to bring to your attention. We are the external auditors, and Marks Paneth are the internal accountants who basically generate the numbers that we then take and perform the audit on. So
There's no staff. You have to do it.
There's no staff, right? We gather the information from various parties to do that. I just want to introduce, I've been the engagement partner on, we issue compilation reports on these, so I've been the engagement partner on that. This past year, I turned it over to another partner from Marks Paneth, Sibby Thomas, who was here. So if you have any difficult questions, Sibby would be more than happy to answer.
And I believe, maybe this is the point, Joe, you have a required communication, so that...
Yeah, we have a required communication letter. It's basically called report to board. All of the pertinent things that we need to advise governance.
Excuse me, sir. Move up your mic. I think it'll be easier. That's it.
There you go.
May I just explain briefly? Unlike the other entities that we saw today, there is no board of directors or audit committee for the tax lien trusts.
Yep.
That's why the city is spelled with a lowercase t then, as it should be capitalized.
Again, accounting policies, they're all spelled out in footnote 1 to the financial statements. There are accounting estimates in there. Certainly the largest estimate in there is the uncollectability of the tax, or the bad debt reserve that in essence is recorded related to the tax liens. There is a very robust cash flow model that Tom's group actually does to compute the estimate of the uncollectible accounts. From our standpoint as the auditors, what we do is evaluate the assumptions that go into determining that estimate. From a difficulties encountered in performing the audit, there were actually none. I would say this year was probably the smoothest year that we have had. This year, we went to initially biweekly and then weekly telephone conversations in order to see what the status was. And so at every step along the way, Marks Paneth kept us and OMB in the loop in terms of where they were. So we were actually able to meet the deadline very comfortably this year. Corrected and uncorrected misstatements, there were none. No disagreements with management. There was a representation letter that we got prior to going final. Management consultation with other accountants. We don't consider Marks Paneth to be another audit firm in this particular arena. They are, in essence, your accounting staff. And again, really no other findings, nothing else that we need to bring to your attention as governance.
We charge interest on these liens.
Yes, you have.
Yeah, I believe that was basically roughly 9%, and I mean, this is really not, an effort to, maximize money, but it's rather just to incentivize, please pay and not incur any interest at all. But that's an incentive to get in and pay and not incur that charge.
And I think I've asked this in past years. 1998 will soon drop out.
No, actually, I was going to address why you have 4 of these rather than 1, as Alan had a singular. Is that we establish a trust every year for each set of tax liens that we securitize every year. So the bond sale and the trust go together, so the pool stands on its own. Once the bonds are paid off, that securitized that pool of liens. It goes into the 98 trust. So the 98 trust is going to remain out there forever, and it's basically the residual repository of liens that were once securitized, and when the associated debt is discharged, the liens are transferred over. So you see 2016 is the first year that, trust was established to securitize last year's liens. The 2014 trust, you see, drops off, and all those liens were then transferred to 1998, and next year when we have this
That's
discussion.
like the holding the lien.
The 98 trust is,
It has a
yes.
color, we call it the graveyard trust.
Okay.
The lien sale itself, the securitization has I think an average life, is Tom here, is it 2.5 years, something like that, 2.3. So that's why it drops off very quickly, all the, but not in 1 year, because it continues the 2 years, 2 plus.
And you do sell the liens that are not redeemed, is that
Yes,
it?
but there's a process after we go through this, before you ever get to the point of a process in court and actually taking somebody. There are very few properties that are actually taken, as opposed to the old in REM program. I don't know whether you have an order of magnitude, but it's so quite a comparison, 2% versus the old days. If we didn't bring it down from $900 million to $60 million, can you imagine, the in REM process to take all those properties? What a mess.
Yeah, it wouldn't work.
Right.
Okay. Go ahead, Michelle.
Just quickly, because I used to be involved with this a little bit, including when you set up the formulas for valuing the liens. I'm just curious if you use the same model, if there have been any refinements made over time.
We did make a change this year on the brownfield liens. Those are liens on identified contaminated properties. Previously, we valued those at zero. We have a vehicle to dispose of those liens, so we actually marked some of those liens up based on the inherent value of the property. So we now have a vehicle that can actually liquidate.
How many, or just proportionately, or some rough idea, have we actually successfully disposed of the brownfield?
About 4 so far, in excess of $20 million.
Great.
We have about 12 remaining.
That's terrific. Thank you.
You're not concerned about being a party to the brownfield from the standpoint of liability under the federal laws?
No, the brownfields are enclosed in a separate LLC, a wholly owned subsidiary of the 1998 trust, to protect it from some liability. But with respect to federal liability, the way we've structured the liquidation is that the LLC never takes title to the properties, so we're really not in the chain of ownership
okay.
for a responsible party.
Somebody worried about that. Good. I have a couple of minor questions. In the 1998 trust, there's a reference, the trust determined that its financial operations more closely aligned accordingly. It doesn't state when, so it's hard to tie that down. And it must have been some time ago, obviously.
Could you tell us where you're?
I'm looking at page 18 of the 1998-2 trust notes.
That's the graveyard trust.
And it just doesn't, it's a statement that says it made a determination. And next I read it, it says that restate its 11 financial statements. That's a lot of long ago history. So I presume you made this determination some time ago rather than in connection with this financial statement.
Yeah, these used to be accounted for as a trust fund and not a governmental type.
Well, my only suggestion, Warren, is to stay when, so that you can understand that rather than
Yeah, no, I understand. That's a good point. Just
a blind point.
the accounting used to be different.
Yeah. And then my usual one, there's an awful lot of cash in banks that's not collateralized.
Yeah, I mean, we've had this discussion year in and year out, and, as much as I enjoyed the discussion, operationally, as we talked about, we really have, as you could see, have outsourced the day-to-day operations and keep it running. But as it pertains to the actual balances, there's sort of two big drivers that are sort of hard to get around. One is the collections, that they come in regularly, and the processing time, sometimes doesn't dovetail nicely with June 30th. The other aspect of it is when you cut checks to the third parties, notably the servicers and the lawyers, that frees
Well, you
up
touched my
cash.
soul when you said the lawyers.
Sorry?
You touched me when you said the lawyers.
Lawyers, he's a lawyer.
There we go. Well,
One or two other little things, but there are something.
Like 2016, that doesn't mean it's just 2016 taxes that weren't paid, right? Or it does?
No, those are just liens that were sold in 2016, but the actual underlying receivables can be from multiple years of
But the
unpayment.
the liens, but the tax liabilities are attributable to prior years?
They can be, yes.
Like,
Because, for instance, under the city's lien sale law, if you're a tax class 1 property, you have to be delinquent for at least 3 years in order to qualify for sale. So if your charges get sold in 2016 and you're a tax class 1 property, you probably owe at least some amount of charges for at least 3 years.
By the way, one thing we didn't say was that we're really pleased. There's a lot of hard work that went in with the city council to renew the program, recently renewed. And I think for the
they
first...
didn't want to give up the in-rem program, I guess.
Well, so, but it was renewed for, I guess, 4 years through
Yes.
2020, which is a first time. And there were a lot of refinements, some additional protections the city council wanted, and it would be a lot of work by a lot of people at OMB. John, you were, not this time, but others at OMB as well. So.
Sure, no.
If I may, one more thing. You referred to, on page 21, environmentally challenged tax liens. What does that mean?
Is that the brownfields, guys? Yeah.
Yes, those are tax liens attributable to properties that the properties have identified significant
That's an
environmental
awkward way
contamination.
of saying that. It doesn't convey.
It doesn't. It's not as alarming as the same brownfield stuff.
Okay.
But I guess the liens that are, the tax liens that are never redeemed, it must be pretty bad property. Is that it? Or, you know,
You want to characterize?
Well, I mean, there are a variety of reasons. Either the underlying property has some level of problem or distress, or you
Okay.
could have properties that are well over leveraged and the mortgage company has decided
Okay.
not to protect its asset. I mean, that's really the.
but, yes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple questions, more some broader questions, and then some specific questions with regards to the audit report that was prepared. So could you just, I mean, you guys talked about the in-rem process back, before the reforms. But the current process right now, could you just give a quick explanation as to how that precisely works?
This is, so I think I've covered up to the point where we actually do the sale. We actually put notices out that incentivize people to pay. Once we have the sale, before we get to the 2% who actually go through the risk in court of losing their home, maybe, Tom, you can take it from the sale forward.
Sure. So when a lien is sold, essentially the trust has 2 private servicing companies which attempt to collect the debts from the taxpayers. So they will do a variety of communications. Under the law, you have between 9 months and a year, if you don't make payment to the trust, that the trust can actually file a foreclosure proceeding against your property. That foreclosure process is done in each of the county courts. The foreclosure could take anywhere from 2 to 4 years to complete, depending on the complexity of the foreclosure action. Under the law, the foreclosure process is the same as if you foreclose on a mortgage. In that time, the property tax payer is allowed to actually enter into a payment plan with the trust if it also seeks to do that. If there is no payment and no payment plan secured, the trust will seek to get judgment against the property. And then if a judgment is rendered, the trust doesn't get the property. The court actually schedules a sale of the property. And New York State is somewhat unique in that it has equity of redemption, which means that all the trust is allowed to actually collect is what it is owed. And then any excess goes to either other lien holders on the property, or if there is extra, actually the property owner gets that equity. So, there's a sort of demarcation or division of the proceeds from the sale of the property. Like I said, only about 2% of the properties in the sale process ever actually go through the full foreclosure process. A lot of people voluntarily redeem before foreclosure is filed, and a significant number actually redeem in the course of the foreclosure proceeding.
That's very helpful. And is there, and that sale, is it a competitive bid or?
Yes, it's a public auction.
Public
So
auction,
actually,
right.
the court appoints a lawyer who's called the referee, and he actually
Right.
administers the sale.
So it's just like a normal.
It's a public outcry auction.
And have you guys done an analysis if we were to, if the city was to potentially exempt single-family homes from this, or are majority of the property single-family homes?
I would not say the majority of properties are single-family homes. I think single-family, I think tax class 1 is probably by number of properties probably significant, but not single-family homes. I think single-family homes are already exempt from water, from being sold in the water for delinquent water bills. But I don't think we've done an analysis on what it would mean financially if you exempted any particular type of property.
Thank you. And then just a couple of more specific questions. In the 1998 document, so on page 11 with regards to the fees, it says the trust administrative fees are 4.871, and then for 2016, and then 3 for 2015. Why is there such a difference in the cost for the trust?
Okay, so servicing fees are measured as follows. The servicer collects a 1% of principal balance as a base fee, and then for each portfolio, there's an incentive collection fee that increases as the portfolio is paid down. So for the first half of the portfolio, they earn a 1% incentive collection fee. But for the last 15% of the portfolio, they collect a 6% incentive fee. And the idea is to incentivize them to collect that the most difficult to collect dollars at the end of the portfolio are the most valuable for them to collect. So if you think about each portfolio, when things get consolidated into 982, you're going to have the end of all those portfolios. So the marginal fees on those portfolios are going to be higher than the newer trusts, where you're still in the beginning stage of collecting the portfolio. So and so that's really to align. We want to align the servicers to collect the hardest dollars, and also we want to incentivize them to collect rapidly so that the bonds can be paid off and the interest expense of the city is lower.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
If I,
Just gonna, you say the 90, so how many lien sales may there be in a year, or could they be in a year?
We had 1 year when there were 2. We had 1 year when there were none. And all the other years, we typically, what we do is 1 a year.
One.
Right.
Till the notice is sent, till the arrangements are made.
Right. We've already started the one for 2017.
Pardon me, sir?
We've already I think we've actually given the 90-day notice,
Yes.
haven't we, for the 2017? We've already started for the current year, which
For
typically it happens in the
current
summer.
fiscal year to have
Right.
one.
Yeah.
I have 2 questions. What in the report to the board, the last sentence on the first page says the financial statement disclosures are neutral, consistent, and clear. I am not ever seen the word neutral applied to the financial statements in any other letter. Is there something special about that here?
No, not at all. That's a standard verbiage that we put in all of our required communications letter.
Okay, well, I've never seen it in any other accounting firm, so that's why I ask. The other comment I would make, and this is, I look at the one of the trusts, you don't, to get to the back of the page, back of the report, to know that, in effect, it's out of business. You see a whole bunch of blank lines, and I kept wondering what happened. And then I got to the last page and found out that you
That was the-
terminated. I think you might want to
Put that in front, that it's
but
no
mention it
longer.
earlier.
That would have been the 2014 trust that was done, yeah.
I just think that you don't want to make the reader
Bearing
wait
the
till
lead.
the end.
Right.
Bury the lead. So you can't now. Okay.
All right, if there are no more questions, Thank you, Mr. Williamson. We should go to the New York City Technology Development Corporation.
Not us.
You can go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for everything. Who was this?
I'm gonna do it. I didn't do all
Oh,
this
he's
work
coming
marking
back.
up. I'm gonna give it to you.
Yeah. Possibly, yeah.
They're pretty new here, right? For a few years already. What, it came under Mayor Bloomberg?
Yes.
It came under Mayor Bloomberg, right?
All right. Great.
Are you headed home after this? Or you have a quick Chinese lunch?
No, we have an executive session, Mark.
I gotta meet some
I know.
friends at 3
We have to
o'clock.
have an executive.
I don't expect to eat that long. We
We
do,
have to have an executive session.
but I'm not rushing, I just.
No, because of that Lander thing. Yes, good morning. Sorry it took that long. Could you introduce yourselves, please?
Hello, I'm back. So, Robert Balducci, my role here is the Assistant Treasurer. To the left of me is Marge Ginsburg, who's the Acting President of TDC, and to the left of her is Brendan Hancock,
one are we
who's the
doing?
Treasurer of TDC. To the right of me, we have our auditors, which is Warren Rupel, and
Yeah, I've been a little negligent. Dan McAway, who's the manager on all these financing entities, I didn't introduce him before, so I wanted to catch up because, as I usually say, the partners do all the talking and the managers do all the works. I didn't want to omit Dan.
so I'm going to actually, just to give you, because I think we've presented, this might be our third time, so I just as a reminder, I'm going to turn it over to Marge, who's just going to give you a reminder what TDC does. Marge.
Technology development.
Hi. Technology Development Corp. is a nonprofit that was created in 2012, and we do large-scale IT information technology projects for city agencies.
So how many people are you in the company?
We're 19 people.
How much?
19.
19.
Yeah.
And you're involved in some major projects right now?
Yes. I'll give you a couple examples. We've been involved in pre-KA or universal pre-K for all since the beginning. So we're still involved in that. Outreach is done every year to find all those 4-year-olds to enroll. We're involved in the Department of Finance property tax system rollout. There's a major...
So you like internal consultants in the city provide?
Exactly, yes. We're a captured IT consulting firm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which city agency is the contract registered in?
The mayor's office.
I'm sorry, sir?
The city contract is registered with the mayor's office.
It's the mayor's office. Yes, yes, that's what I thought. So what is the source of your revenue? The people you consult for? No, you're getting money from the city.
Right, so the primary source of the revenue is a contract with the City of New York.
Thank you. And how much is that contract for?
$5 million a year.
How much?
$5 million.
$5 million.
Right, per year.
And it bridges a few fiscal years, or every year it's renewed for $5 million.
It was originally a 3-year contract with 2 1-year renewals.
With
2 1-year renewals.
renewals.
Yeah.
So it's still being renewed.
We're actually, the mayor's office has determined to not renew our contract. So we're done June 30th. That's the end of our current contract.
Not to renew, so you would be completing,
We'd be dissolving.
dissolving at the end of this fiscal year?
Correct.
I see. That's too bad. I'm sorry. I don't,
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to clarify. You are actually dissolving TDC?
Correct.
It's not going to exist?
We're in the process of putting that plan together.
Excellent.
This was news that we got at the beginning of January, so.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Good news. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
What make,
I'm sorry.
this function will cease to exist, is what you said.
The determination, our current chair is Commissioner Roast, who's the head of Do It, and between Do It and the agencies, they'll work to provide their own services or procure them on the outside.
I mean, Do It will help the agencies do what you were doing to some extent.
Where appropriate, yeah. So it'll either be Do It will provide it, or some of the agencies, many of the agencies have their own IT organizations, and either they will have to create lines or hire outside consultants to do what we do.
Where were you located?
We have office space at Metro Tech in Brooklyn.
Oh, where Do It is?
Correct,
Yes.
yeah. Most of our folks spend most of their time at the client, however, so.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
understand.
What a shame. That's, all I said was, what a shame.
Thank you.
Well, we think so.
We
as
think
well.
so too.
No, it is, it is. Of course, there are some very complicated applications, I guess, where your people were very helpful too.
Well, let me ask you a question. If this were a real audit committee with managerial representation, you might go on record as saying this is a mistake, and you go back to the board and say, why don't you reconsider? Is that something we should, as a group, think about doing? That's not for you to get involved in, but maybe we should talk about it.
Michelle,
Maybe we
have
should
some
take that
thoughts on
under
this.
advisement.
I'm not speaking for the Comptroller's Office on this, but I think that even at the time of the creation, there were some concerns about how practical a solution this was to some problems, and I am not sure if the principals involved would disagree with the mayor's decision.
And I just wanted to,
Mr. Khan.
I just wanted to add, the New York Times had an article when the entity was first created that highlighted a number of potential ethical concerns and procurement rule issues and accountability. And then there were subsequent issues in the Daily News piece from 2014. And then our office actually had some concerns about TDC when Link NYC was established, involving an employee of TDC that then went to go work for the company that got the contract involved in this matter, and it was a senior manager. So there were some ethical concerns as to this contract that goes into the hundreds of millions of dollars. And so, I mean, you're expressing that you guys are shutting down, but I mean, I did have some questions with regards to what type of ethical obligations do you follow? What type of contracting rules do you follow, if any, that relate to that are in your procedures?
Our contracting obligations more or less mirror the procurement.
Could you speak up, sir?
Yes, our contracting policy is more or less adopted and mirrors the procurement policy board rules, which is essentially city procurement policy. So in regards to how we procure goods and services, it would be like any mayoral city agency.
So why don't you follow the PPB rules?
We are only permitted to basically use a subset of the PPB rules, competitive sealed bids and competitive sealed proposals, which is to say that we do not leverage, for example, any of the rest of the PPB innovative procurements, emergency procurements like city agencies are permitted to do. Again, our contract literally is a mirrored version of competitive sealed bid and competitive sealed proposals.
So it seems like just from news reports that I'd read that a lot of the projects that you take on are are exigent. Are exigent. They're timely. At least that was some of the comments that were made as to why certain contracts were no bid contracts.
We've always been essentially assigned to projects as per the city itself. We do not take on any contract work per se. We're placed on projects by...
Yeah, the process in terms of how we're assigned, how we get to work on anything is Commissioner Roast is currently our chair. Prior to that, it was the CTO, Minerva Tantoco. And there's a process of identifying a project, bringing it to the chair, determining the scope, and then actually writing an official memo, and the city approves that we're on it. So we don't do anything without any work at all without the mayor's office or the mayor's office designee saying that we should work on it.
So, I mean, this is just from the Daily News piece. It says TDC is able to hire vendors without putting contracts out to bid. TDC does this by claiming that the need for consultant work is time sensitive, then expanding a consultant's existing city contract with what are called task orders. Is that how it works?
So, it's similar to a task order. We call it a letter of engagement, and it's a memo, and that's how we assign one to, I think our largest project has 4 people on it. We have not, there was a clause in our contract that covered in the first year around how to hire outside. And it was specific to some specific projects that were in the first year, which was in 2012 or 13. So that hiring outside, any other outside procurements don't happen anymore. It's outside of our contract capabilities right now.
But it used to.
In the first year.
Okay.
And it was specifically for, I believe, for some named projects, if I recall how it was written in the contract.
If I may. Yes. First, I should explain my role here. So I am the controller of the other entities that we discussed earlier. TDC was set up, and they needed an accounting function. So for them to actually create one as their first setup, we had the infrastructure and economies of scale, where we have a management agreement with them, and we served as their payables and their accountants to put these financial statements together. But that's aside to what your question is. So I don't know how old that.
This is from August 10th, 2014.
24, okay, yeah. So just for some perspective, if we were to even look at the financial statements, the 15, 16, the consulting fees are very minimum. I think it's 147,000 and 138,000. So that is not prevalent to what's really happening within the last couple of years.
So these issues with regards to the no bid contracts, that's no longer happening. That was a relic of a.
Right. So I don't know, because on the financial part, I'm on the financial part, so I don't know what that operational decision was making, but that's not representative of what's been going on here.
Our current operations, anything over 25,000, we would go to bid and get 3. We would follow the rules in terms of getting 3 quotes.
Even in that August of 2014 newspaper article I believe you're referencing is stemming back to a Gartner bid, which had been done for the municipal ID program as a request for proposal. That was bid as well. There were 3 bidders on that contract that was awarded.
So the article is inaccurate then on that part? Or?
I'm of the opinion that the article is not taking into account that a competitive bid was exercised at that time.
Okay.
I'm just looking at page 11.
I'm sorry, may I just ask, was that a bid or an RFP?
I do not recall. I'd have to go back through the procurement documentation.
Okay.
I would imagine that it was a proposal, given that it was technical, but I don't want to make that
because
assumption.
there is a certain degree of subjectivity in the decision of RFPs that does not exist in a bid.
It was prior to when I had been employed by the company, but I believe because it was a technical evaluation, it would have been a proposal as opposed to a bid.
That's. I just wanted to sort of bring that into the record. Thank you.
There was a question on the financial statement.
So your program revenue was the contract revenue?
Correct.
I see.
That's our only revenue.
I'm sorry?
That's our only revenue.
Yeah. And it wasn't necessarily $5 million a year, according to your statement. It's like 4 point. In other words, some was spent already, or?
It was the contract with the mayor's office was for, I believe, up to $5 million, but then the actuals,
not to exceed.
Right, not to exceed. Our actuals were always less.
And you may have drawn down less than the $5 million if you didn't need it.
Correct.
Yes, Mr. Carter.
So just to clarify, and this is not, well, I guess it does pertain to audit because it does have with respect to risk. Are employees of TDC subject to COIB rules and substantial policymaker designations and all those other requirements?
Up until last Thursday. We've always been subject, it's written into the contract, all the COIB rules. So the normal not being able to go to back to the matter, not being able to go to the agency in terms of employment.
Sure.
That was written in assuming that TDC existed so that people wouldn't hop around and the city would pay more for the same people. We requested of our board to, and the board was the jurisdiction over that, the way it was written in, because it was a part of the contract. And we requested of the board to waive it because our agency, the TDC, will no longer exist after July 1st. So it's a right to work problem of folks being able to go for a job after July 1st after they're laid off.
Right, but if any person is working for any government agency and then leaves that agency, right? So I, as a substantial policymaker with the city, cannot go and work on something that I was intimately involved in my time. So why was that waiver necessary? I mean, why? I mean, that's a part of your contract. That's something that you're aware of when you join the agency.
The discussion was around that we're not city employees. We do not receive any city benefits. We don't get paid by the city. It was something that was in existence as when TDC was in existence, and written in as an extra in terms of our contract. And you're right, everybody knew that this was a part of coming to work for TDC, that they wouldn't then go on. Commissioner Roast's discussion around it, and she agreed with providing the waiver, and she's our chair, was that if Joe works for Accenture on Monday and IBM on Tuesday, Joe could still go back and work on the same matter if you go from one vendor to another. And so this was her and the board's view of looking at TDC as a vendor, and it waived and it provided that waiver. To be honest, the city's going to try to potentially hire some people from TDC, and the city always has the capability of doing that with or without the COIB rules.
Okay. To add a layer to that, we are not subject to the conflict of interest board itself.
Right.
We're
right. The rules of the COIB apply to you.
Correct.
So how would that be enforced if someone does? So is that for anyone who's ever worked for TDC, or is that for current employees of TDC until until the termination of the entity?
I don't recall if that was. I think it would be for all employees ever at this point. But specifically, the 19 people who are there will get an ongoing obligation letter from the General Counsel, as well as the written statement regarding the waiver for future employment.
Okay. I mean, 'cause I hope you can appreciate my concern in the sense of there's already an example of one employee of TDC who then went off to work for a company that actually got the contract for, from the city of New York. So. I mean, that's the reason why.
No, I understand the concern.
And if you're such small teams, that means the person was likely intimately involved in the issue. Mm-hmm. And also then, I guess, questions why these type of protections were not in place.
Most of our work is in implementation. So not so much, and we have some work that's in pre-procurement, but most of the work is in implementation. So the chance of something being bid based on the work that we're doing, it's actually making it happen. The award has already been done.
I have an unrelated question.
Speak up, Michelle.
I have an unrelated question. If you go to page 5 of in your MD&A, it talks about in the middle of that first paragraph, salaries and benefits associated with increased headcount constituted the majority of the roughly $700,000 increase. So that was a 4-person increase, I think, that resulted in a $700,000 additional expense. And also a little further down in that paragraph, there was an increase of 6 people in 2015, and that did not result in anywhere near that level of expense increase. Now, I know the timing of the hires throughout the year might affect this, but that's a very big difference. Can you explain it?
I think mostly what you're looking at is scattered hiring of various different types of levels of employees within the organization at large. The salaries of our employees range anywhere between, say, around $75,000 to upwards of $190,000. And because these people were hired incrementally through various fiscal quarters, it's difficult to account for it within the spectrum of a fiscal year. These folks come and go frequently sometimes.
The note says that it constituted the majority of the increase. Can you give me a rough estimate of how much of that increase was simply related to increased headcount?
For the fiscal year 16?
Correct.
I'd have to look directly at the books in order to
Okay,
give you a
I'd be interested if you have an opportunity, if you could send that response to the committee's secretary. Thank you.
But your 19 people, to stick with your number, they were your employees, right?
Yes.
You people paid them,
Yes.
so on, and they were assigned to work on these projects.
With the exception of that we had a general counsel and a secretary that were DO-IT employees.
That were
Department of Information Technology
They
and
were DO-IT
Telecommunications
employees.
We paid their salaries via an MOU agreement with the Department of Information of
You
Technology and
paid them
Telecommunications.
based on the time they gave you.
Correct. So that would be part of also your level up. A secretary was brought in-house during fiscal year 2016, a legal counsel, whereas that had prior never showed up on our, essentially on our payroll before. So.
If I could just to clarify for the record, when you say that you pay these people, your only source of revenue is the City of New York, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And Michelle, if we go to 11, page 11, under the salaries and benefits, I think that if you could see that that is where you're going to find your increase.
They were their
Thank you.
employees.
That's very helpful.
Michelle, they were their employees. They paid them and so on and so forth. Forget whether they are city employees or not, it doesn't matter. They had to pay their people.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just one last question on my part. Are you guys involved in as you said that you're involved with the implementation, are you involved in the implementation of Link NYC?
Involved in what?
Are you involved with the implementation of Link NYC?
No.
Okay.
I've been at TDC for about 2 years, and in the time I've been at TDC, we have not been involved at all.
Okay. But
No.
it's okay. That's fine.
Were we before? Do you know?
At my time at TDC, I've only heard of rumors from the past, never any direct implementation.
What does that mean?
It means within all of the records that I have for our programs, Link NYC is not one of our programs.
And that was never a program of TDC, no involvement whatsoever?
Not that we're aware.
Not that we're aware
Yeah.
of, sir.
So I think it may help the members if you were to.
If there are no more questions, we'd like to move to an executive session.
So we should. I'm sorry.
Warren, do you have a
I'm sorry?
Yeah, we should actually discuss the financial statements.
I'm sorry, sir?
We should discuss the financial statements because we do have a restatement here and there is a management letter.
Yes.
Yes?
I don't understand.
The financial statements, they want to go over the financials.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so, these financial statements are simple enough, but, I have to admit, we dropped the ball. Once we started this company up, the employees came on and there were really no accrued leave balances that we had to put onto the books. Never had it in our work papers, and our previous audit program never reviewed it. That's why it's good to have a new look. And when Mark Spanis came in, they saw that was something that we did not do, and we had to restate here. Although it is, $100 and some odd thousand based on our $400 million of expenditures within the liability, since there is very little liabilities, it was material to that area. And I'm going to just turn it over to Warren to,
Yeah, like Bob said, the absolute dollar amount to the city is not that significant, but to these financial statements and to this balance sheet, they were significant. So that not only caused the restatement of the prior period, but also that was the only difference that would have been between the fund financial statements and the government-wide financial statement. So it caused the entity to create government-wide financial statements as well as the reconciliations. And then because there was a restatement, our management letter identifies the fact that there was a material misstatement is indicative of material weakness in internal controls, so the management letter reports that as such.
Fortunately, somebody caught it.
Yes, we
Yes.
we wish it was, you
That's
know,
all.
as of day one, so.
One,
So
the,
we should move on.
wait, one quick question. The deficit, that is really an amount that's due from the city.
Yeah, the deficit, you know, is a true deficit. Our expenditures was above our cash balances because.
No, but you would then bill the city for whatever you spent against that contract.
Yeah, because we had up to $5 million on there, so we were still underspent, so we would have actually requested to draw down on that
Yeah,
contract.
but then, why wasn't a receivable booked for the amount that's due back from the city against your expenditures?
The way that we have the contract set, it's based on receiving revenues on when we requisition the monies. So it's actually at the time of the requisition. So since we requisition in advance, we wouldn't have a receivable. We've actually discussed that one.
You mean you didn't requisition
We
it
did-
prior to
we
the
did-
financial
We
statement
did not,
date?
and just the mechanism is we requisition the month before the quarter, so mechanically we couldn't requisition for 17 when we're in 16's financials.
Real amount of money. It's always the little things you can spend time on.
Right.
Just one last, about how much in total awards did you guys give in terms of contracts last year?
I just was gonna ask one question.
I think it would be safe to say if we go to page 11,
Yeah.
it would be what we reported, 147 and 15 and 138.
Yeah, it's consulting fees that specifically were for consultants on the pre-K for all program.
Okay.
Your consulting fees, you had to hire some consultants to help in these projects, is that it?
Exactly.
Correct.
It was a very specific technical expertise.
I'm sorry?
It was very specific technical expertise that
Okay.
we were able to bring in.
I'm sorry that your contract was not renewed. I'm sorry to hear it, but there's nothing that we can do, and I think I would entertain a motion to adjourn the regular session and go into executive session.
I'd like to make that motion that we go into executive
will
session
second it.
for the purpose of discussing non-public financial information about
Yeah.
the corporation.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you all, and thank you for your patience.
Move that following the executive session, which we have just exited, we adjourn the full meeting of the audit committee.
Second. Oh, boy, I'm in
You're taking
favor.
all this home?
What? No, I'm not. That's not mine.
No, that's mine.
I'm not taking it home. I gave it to the guy.